Hi, guys, and welcome back to another week of the Green Dragon Podcast. I'm your host, Aiden.
I'm your fellow host, Tom.
And your fellow host, Jake.
Guys, we're back another week. We haven't seen the world blown to bits, as everybody's predicted. So that's some good that's some good news. Um, Last week, uh, there was a lot of stuff going around about Russia nuking Ukraine and nuking the U.S. and all sorts of crazy stuff. But I think we'll discuss it a little bit today, but I think we can maybe shed a little bit more light, kind of give our thoughts on that. I think there's been a lot of tension between obviously the US and Russia and Ukraine, but I think a lot of the media that we see has portrayed the situation to be a little bit worse than it actually is. Imagine that. And the situation is bad, but the media always has a knack for showing what they want to show to create more fear in us. And I think that's something this week I realized more than recently. Um, it's just it's almost like I'm back in the good old days of COVID when you turn on the news and the world seemed to be falling apart constantly, according to the news. When in fact, places like Florida were perfectly fine. So we'll discuss, I think, that news a little bit today. And there was a lot. There was a lot of good podcasts I listened to this week, guys, that I kind of want to go over. One today, especially, that came up, and I got a chance to listen to. Tom, I know you listened to some of it, but it was the Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Rogan. She went on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I think there was a lot of things she said there that I guess needed to be said, especially by somebody that is has a lot more influence, especially in the political sphere, than most people. And I felt like she showed me, I think, or she displayed that there are still some good politicians out there. Some politicians that actually have the people um, of America's interest in mind and not just their own interest. So I thought that was really great. So I think we'll chat about that too. But I did want to clarify something real quick because I was listening to last week's podcast, and one thing that I noticed is I didn't clarify the legislation being pushed that would ban all gas powered vehicles in California. So the current legislation being pushed would ban. This is the timeline. I didn't really have a good idea of the timeline, so I just wanted to give you guys the timeline. The current legislation would ban the sales of all gas powered vehicles by 2035, so a little over 10 years from now. What I did find ironic, and I don't know if we mentioned this in the last podcast, but a week after this was announced, California actually told electric car owners that they couldn't charge their their vehicles because the power grid was all screwed up. So if that just kind of gives you an idea of the issues going on over there in California, that sums it up nicely. But I just wanted to clarify that because I don't think I actually gave an accurate date there. But yeah, if you guys do you guys want to discuss the Tulsi Gabbard podcast a little bit? I know before we hopped on we were talking about it a little bit, but I thought there was a lot of really good insights there from Tulsi. Um, as always, Joe Rogan did an excellent job interviewing, and there was a lot of great conversation there. But Tom, did you have anything you wanted to share? I know you listened to the full podcast, so you might have a better idea. I got the first like 40 minutes of it.
Um, well, something that was really nice to hear. So they started talking to each other about just how crazy the left has been in supporting all these really strange ideologies. And so they were just breaking down the things that they're supporting and then the way that Tulsi thought the Democrats should have been. So she was saying that when she joined the Democratic Party, she wanted it to be like J.F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, like a party of the people. But she said now it's just become like pretty much the antithesis of almost all things American, like free speech. She didn't mention guns, but guns, uh, yeah, just all the things that we hold true for freedom in America. And she said that they're anti-freedom. She says they don't want us to have the liberties that our founding fathers gave us. And so I thought it was really inspirational listening to someone like that, because she said she was in the DNC and she was kind of in the weeds with all of it. And when she first came on, they were like, well, this will be the face of the Democratic Party. And then they quickly found out that she wasn't a normal one. And she said that all of her campaigns were as a independent Democrat. So she wasn't backed by the actual party per se. So that was interesting. Because when listening to her and like seeing her before, I'm like, how in the world could she be a Democrat? You know, like she's so level-headed. It seems so strange. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I kind of, I guess I didn't realize that until I listened to the podcast. And yeah, I mean, she's really, I mean, from somebody that comes from the Democratic Party, I don't, I don't typically agree with most Democrat politicians, but listening to her in the past, I really respected her, and I think I respect her even more after listening to this podcast today. But I thought, yeah, like you said, Tom, I think the thing that's really stood out to me was how adamant she was. And this is the reason she's actually leaving the Democratic Party. She announced that she's leaving the Democratic Party and becoming an independent because she really emphasized how the Democratic Party, which, like you said, used to be the party for the people, is now anti free speech, anti free thought, free expression, all these things. And really, I mean, attacking every single liberty that makes us American, which is, I mean, their party at heart is currently anti American. And that's a scary thing. Um, when half the country votes Democrat, and not that you know every Democrat thinks that way. And I think that's maybe the other thing that I took away from this is how it's important not to take a whole group of people and kind of lump them all together, because obviously for a long time Tulsi Gabbard was part of the Democratic Party, and I'm sure there's plenty of other Democrats like her that maybe don't have the same voice that she has, and that would like to see a lot of change within um, the current leadership in the Democratic Party. And I think this extremism that we're seeing, especially in the last 5 years for sure, is anti-American. So I thought that was really interesting. Um, I also liked how another thing you brought up, Tom, is that she kind of ran as an independent in the Democratic Party. She didn't run necessarily with the Democratic Party's backing. I think the thing that I guess I had realized in the past, but never really put two and two together, is you know how how much career politicians are plaguing America, and how much of a plague it is to America to have these career politicians. Because one of the things I really respect, at least in her, and that other people that do this, is they they realize when they need to separate themselves from a certain political party, or not take the backing of a political party or even a special interest group and all these things, because they're not in it for the money like a lot of politicians are. They're not in it for the money, they're actually in it to make a change. And I think she's one of the few that's actually in it to make a change. I think there's very few out there. And
Yeah.
and so that was really cool to kind of hear that, because I don't have a lot of trust, to be honest, with for most politicians, because most of them seem like they're in it for the money. And if you're in it for the money, you're probably not making decisions that are based off what the American people want or should have. You're making it based on what's going to line your pocket. So I thought that was interesting too. Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I know. Listening to that, to her interview with Rogan brought back some memories from 2020 for me when she was in the Democratic primary debate and completely eviscerating Kamala Harris,
Yeah.
taking down Biden. And I remember thinking, like, there's no way she's a slam dunk. She's going to be going against Trump. And this was before I was really into politics and understood how the deep state works. But obviously didn't pan out. They gave it to Joe. But yeah, I mean, I just remember being struck by how sincere she seemed as opposed to the rest of the candidates from the Democrats as well as the Republicans even.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of crazy to look back to 2020 and see how I mean, she very clearly was um, the best candidate for the Democratic Party, and she not only was the best candidate, but she also in the debates pointed out the severe flaws that a lot of the other people running, and I would even venture to say I think she was the one that kept Kamala Harris from actually running for president and not being the vice president, because of what she, brought to light. And that's something that's really, really, it's amazing to me that it wasn't really brought out by a lot of news sources before. But Kamala Harris was, at her record, for somebody that, I think I think Joe Rogan brought this up, for somebody that totes her record so as much as Kamala Harris does. She has a horrible record, and it's not that hard to find. She's held people in prison longer than they should have been in prison, so they could do you know forced labor. I mean, she's had so many infringements on American liberty and American citizens' liberty. It's amazing she's even our vice president. I mean, it's shocking, really, and it's disgusting because she shouldn't be. And the only reason she's there is because she fits the profile of what the Democratic Party wanted. And that's somebody that falls in line with the narrative they're trying to push. And it also is that she's a woman and she's a woman of color. So it checks all the boxes for them. It doesn't matter that she's got a crappy record. They can erase that. You know what I mean? They can just tell the media not to run the stories. So I mean that to me, really put it in perspective on how much of a grasp that the political parties have on the ability to skew the media, skew news stories, skew the public perception to this point where they can get somebody at the into the office of vice president that is so anti-American as Kamala Harris is. Or if you look at Joe Biden and some of the things that have come to light, especially recently with his dealings with China and Hunter Biden's laptop and all those things that came out. I mean, it's truly incredible that they were able to elect into office these two people. And I think it's largely to do with the power and the ability they have to manipulate the public's perception on this. And I thought I think, I listened to Mark Zuckerberg and Joe Rogan's podcast, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, this makes so much more sense now. When Mark Zuckerberg was talking about how the FBI came to him when it was the Hunter Biden laptop story, and they said there's going to be a false narrative that could affect the election. Even and it was about Hunter Biden's laptop. So even if Mark Zuckerberg and Meta didn't know that this was true or false, they still let the FBI kind of step in and interfere with elections. So I think it just shows you the extent that politicians and political parties are willing to go to maintain their power, control, and access to money. It's mind boggling. I mean, all the reach they have. Um, yeah, I think besides that, that might actually be a decent segue into some current news. If you guys don't have anything else to add on the Tulsi Gabbard podcast, I saw a story this week that actually came up. It looks like Hunter Biden actually could possibly be charged um, for the contents of his laptop. The FBI is saying,
Wait, really?
well, it's very possible. It could be which would be a huge win. Now whether we'll see it because of the clout that he holds as the president's son, will we see it in the next 2 years? 3 years, maybe not, but hopefully we'll see somebody come to justice. But do you guys have any notes on? Did you guys look into that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just fascinating how he was able to fly under the radar, being the vice president's son, and the amount of shady business dealings that he had that were revealed by this laptop.
Yeah.
And there is this conception around him that he's sort of this hotshot businessman that maybe got caught up in some things that he shouldn't have, or some foreign dealings that were possibly illicit, but that was brought on by the spotlight that is on him, being the son of a prominent world figure. But I mean, the reality is that it's the reverse. He has really no background whatsoever in business, venture capitalism, any of the skills that he claims to bring to the table. He After Joe Biden was elected along with Barack Obama to be vice president, Hunter did set up a series of pass-through entities to manage his foreign dealings. And as revealed on the laptop, it turned out that he had received roughly $31 million in funds from Chinese businesses, all of which are pretty closely tied to the CCP. And the thing is that in exchange for that 31 million, there's little to no evidence of really any legitimate business that he did or professional services that he provided to them, which begs the question, like, what then? What was that money for? Because China's not going to be giving out free money to the US president's son. There's got to be
Wow.
something more to the story there. And a little test that I like to run when there's something I believe is being underreported by the media, or conversely overreported, is substitute either Trump or Russia into the equation for the subject of the of the test. So in this case, you could substitute both. Let's say that Donald Trump Jr. had dealings with Russian-based companies in that regard, unexplained dealings, as a matter of fact. Do we really think that that would go unreported by the media as it has with Hunter? Probably not.
No, not at all.
But yeah. And then furthermore, there's also, as revealed by this laptop leak, there's actually personal emails where he explicitly refers to having to give money to Joe. There's one, he's kind of ranting to his family members, saying that, like, I'm not going to make you guys give half my salary to dad like he does, or something along those lines, implying that he's in fact funneling funds to his father, which
Wow.
is ironic given that Biden has stated that he never has never spoken in his life to Hunter about any of his business dealings. Um, yeah. Also, there's a few more emails that I remember reading about from that laptop where he's like he's bringing in foreign dignitaries or the board members of these Chinese companies and actually arranging meetings for them with people in the Pentagon and the White House. So it's mind blowing the stuff that he was able to pull off and not face any repercussions for it, even after the laptop leak, just because, um, really, because his dad was running against Trump. That was the only reason that he was able to get away with any of this.
Wow. That is, I mean, it really is mind-boggling when you look at when you start looking at the extent of that. That's insane. And yeah, just to think that the media that we're supposed to get our information from is completely failed to give us any of this. Our It seems like our political systems failed too. If we're allowing politicians to be in power that have, I mean, quite, if this is all true, which I'm pretty sure it is, quite clearly have acted in nefarious ways, whether it's through them or their families. And I think that's another interesting point to make is that, I was thinking about, I was listening to a couple different things this week, and one of the things that kept popping up was they kept talking about Nancy Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi's insider trading, which is, if you look at it, it's quite hilarious. I mean, her husband, I forget what his name is. I feel stupid. I'm blanking on it. Do you guys know what name?
Paul Paul
Paul Pelosi.
Pelosi.
Paul Pelosi. Paul Pelosi. Apparently, I think I heard this. It could have been today with the Tulsi Gabbard podcast. I think Joe Rogan said that Paul Pelosi, in his investments in the stock market, is more successful than Warren Buffett and George Soros. Can you, I mean, just think about that. And this guy, I'm sure, I don't want to put down Paul Pelosi. I mean, I know he actually, I don't know how smart he is. He was drunk driving, but didn't he get a DUI or something like that recently?
He did, but I mean, if I was married to
Married to
Nancy,
Nancy, I might
I
be.
might have some issues too.
Hey, I wouldn't even be drinking. I'd have that alcohol pumped into me via IV. I'd be on a constant drip. I mean, I don't even know if I could say I'd be just consuming alcohol. Might be on some other drugs too. Uh, but yeah, it blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, like kid, like, and I'm like, to think that a guy like that is more successful than the most successful investors of all time, like Warren Buffett. Like, that's crazy. And how is that possible? Well, his wife is feeding him information so he can invest in these companies when she knows they're going to go up and they can get out before they tank. And yeah, she's making bank. I'm sure she siphons, probably just like Sneaky Joe siphoning off money from his son. I'm sure Nancy's siphoning off money from Paul. Maybe that's why Paul was probably trying to escape with some cash when he got in that accident, trying to leave Nancy. But it's crazy, and you know, it's mind boggling that, and I think this goes back to that idea that career politicians are the plague in America. They're truly destroying the American trust in politics and in politicians, in the system we have in place. They're using it to benefit themselves, and in the meantime, they've completely ruined our country and everything our country stood for, and it's just disgusting to see. It's really sad. But yeah, that was some great information. I actually hadn't actually heard too much about the actual specifics, but that was great, Jake. Thanks for sharing that. Tom, did you have anything to add to the Hunter Biden?
Not really. Like that was really helpful, Jake, telling us about all that because I just heard glimpses of things, but that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I should probably reference it. It's the information is derived from the book Red Handed by Peter Schweitzer. He's I believe he's a collaborator at Breitbart. So for any of our listeners who are interested, there's all that and a lot more, a lot more exposure. He goes into actually Pelosi, both Pelosi's he talks about their dealings with China. He goes into the Bush and Trudeau dynasties, which I had no idea um, were affiliated with the CCP, but in fact there are ties there as well. So yeah, it's just a fascinating and really deeply disturbing book as well when you think about it. Just seeing how wrapped up with the CCP our elites are in this country.
Hmm. And most of us don't know, and that's a crazy thing. And we ought we
Is
we ought to know.
Yeah, is that the book that they made the movie My Son Hunter from?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah, it
Right.
came out I think in February of this year, and then yeah, my son Hunter followed up on that.
I looked up the website for that, and since it's an accurate film, they put in like big caps underneath the trailer. It's like, warning, this movie is not for everybody. There is sex, and then more sex.
Oh my
So I was
gosh.
like, oh, that's funny because they just were showing what he did, but to do
Yeah.
that, it had to be a very non-family friendly movie.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy. We should maybe we could put this in the notes for this podcast, but maybe we can leave the links for that book and that movie in our show notes so that our listeners can go find those in a quick manner. I think that'd be helpful. Because I think I haven't read the full book yet, Jake, but I'm meaning to get through the whole thing, and so far it's amazing. It's
Mm.
really, it really is amazing how much. I guess I never really. I mean, I realized it, but not to the extent. I never thought it could be to the extent that it is. Our connections with the CCP in China and all the business dealings. I mean, every elite. When you start to look at it, it's like, oh my gosh, like we're all in bed, and no wonder now. You've got Trudeau. Letting the Chinese, have police stations in Canada. I mean, it's crazy. Hopefully, we don't get to that point.
Do you guys want to hear a funny article I saw? It's just hysterical. You wouldn't believe it unless it was actually written. But Denise D'Souza shared this on Truth Social. But there is an article written in the Atlanta, and I guess there's a study done showing that white people sleep better than black people, and they said it's not fair. No joke.
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't stop laughing. I was like, "This is hysterical!"
Oh my gosh.
What are they?
Wow.
Is it because we have my pillows, or?
Oh my
I
gosh.
just It was hysterical. I just had to share that.
That is hilarious. Oh my god.
Yeah, there's so many different ways you can go with that. I don't even know.
Oh, it's amazing that even was yeah, I would have never guessed it's out there.
Yeah, no, I've found if you want a good laugh, go to the Atlantic. Another funny account. It's on Instagram. It's called Feminist. Um, they
Oh,
have
that's a good one.
some
Yeah.
pretty woke content that will make you will give you a little chuckle if you're a right thinking person.
Yeah, it isn't it funny? Like you go to like some of these, it almost seems like it should be like it's like a bad joke. You read some of this stuff and you're
Yeah,
like, oh my gosh, these
yeah,
people are serious? Like how crazy are they? Like
yeah.
how crazy are they? Not to go down a rabbit hole here, but today I was absolutely appalled listening to that podcast. I think it was Joe Rogan brought this up, but he was talking about this. I think it was a school that one of the kids identified as a, I don't know what you call him, a furry, like a cat. So the parents literally let their kid. They have a litter box for their kid, and their kid goes to the bathroom in this litter box. I'm like, oh my gosh! First of all, unsanitary. You know, and Joe Rogan made this point. If you can teach a cat to use the toilet, you can have your furry kid use the toilet. And I was like, thank you. Somebody said it. Somebody said it. But like, you hear some of this stuff and you're like, oh my gosh, that can't be real. But it is. And you're like, what does this world come to? Oh, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I've I've got a friend who has a close relative that works at a high school near me, and she was telling me that apparently there's a push to install litter boxes in the bathrooms at the high school for the students who identify as furries.
I hope you're joking. Are you serious?
No,
At a high school? At a high
no,
school.
there's at a high school,
Oh
there's
my
like a
gosh.
movement to install. I don't think they haven't followed through on it, but
I hope to
there
God
is
they
a
don't.
push.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
People
Wow.
wonder why they're not happy. You can't be happy. Taking a one or two in the litter box, like.
Yeah, think about the mess you make. I mean, it's all over you get the kitty litter all over your hands and feet. You're tracking around the school. I mean, oh God.
It's terrible.
Not to mention the smell. Human piss in a bathroom. Oh gosh, it's just
Terrible.
disgusting. That's bad. That's really bad. Yeah, it's wrong. It's just
So,
crazy. It's crazy.
gotta pray for those people.
Yeah. Oh, that makes you need to take a deep breath and maybe a drink after hearing about some of that stuff.
They have conventions for them too. I don't know if you guys knew that.
Furry
Furry
conventions?
conventions. Yeah, yeah. And they go down, they actually like it's like a gathering of furries, and it's the saddest part is the parents are taking the kids to these things,
Wow.
and they can go around, they can like play in playpens, and I think like they get pet by people. It's like it's so wrong,
Oh,
but yeah, those do exist, unfortunately.
Wow.
Wish I was just trolling, but no. that's
Whew.
uh that's the reality.
Wow. That's crazy. Oh man. Yeah. Makes you wonder where we're at as a society. Meanwhile, the China's like training like their 6-year-olds to be like military. Everybody's trained in the military. So eh, if we keep going down this road, we'll be pretending we're dogs and cats while they take us over.
Yeah, the
uh,
Chinese and Korean military are rolling around on shreds of glass. We're
yeah,
rolling around in playpens and furry playpens.
exactly. Oh, jeez. Oh boy. Well, moving on, because that's I'll be depressed for the rest of the night if we keep talking about this. I mean, seriously, it's whew. Moving on to a little bit of good news. I'm very happy about this because there's nobody more in this world that I despise than Alec Baldwin. And for those of you who don't know, Alec Baldwin, I'm not sure how you don't know about this, but Alec Baldwin actually killed, was it one person and injured, severely injured another? Earlier, was it the beginning of this year that that happened? I think it was like March, right? He was filming a Netflix movie, and it was an old Western movie, or supposed to be like an old Western movie. And he fired a gun without checking the contents. It was said to hold a blank, but it in fact did not, and it fired a real bullet into a real person that he had the gun pointed at. So right there, I mean, there's there's two rules of gun safety broken, and yeah, I mean, it was a really sad case, and he didn't do him. I mean, he everything he said and did after that was kind of the blame game. I didn't pull the trigger was one of the things he said. I mean, who believes that shit? I mean, seriously. So he claimed for why he didn't pull the trigger. Then ballistics experts proved that he could not, in fact, fire the gun unless he pulled the trigger. So it seems like now, because of that evidence, there's a chance that he gets charged for murder. Now, whether he gets a full sentence like a normal person would is left to be seen. Um, I don't know. Will he escape scot-free because he's the elite of Hollywood? Probably. But I'm hopeful that somebody that is as outspoken as he is on gun control and gun violence, where he's very anti-gun, and then to film a movie where you have a gun in it, why are you doing that if you're anti-gun? Money. If is the short answer, money. But then to completely be that ignorant, so to have no knowledge to the point where you break all the cardinal rules of gun safety and you end up killing a person, and then you end up blaming it on the gun when in fact you were the one that pulled the trigger. And if he would have practiced gun safety rules, that death could have been avoided. So there's a lot there, but I think it's one of those cases where the elite of Hollywood really um, don't deserve. Uh, they don't deserve free passes, and this is just another case. I hope that he's brought this whole situation. He's brought to the charges he should be, because he doesn't deserve any free passes of the law because he's Alec Baldwin. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment and he's outspoken against it. I'm saying this because it's it should be the right thing to do to convict him of murder, because he clearly did it. It probably isn't first degree murder in it anyway, but it's murder nonetheless. He murdered somebody. So hopefully we see that. That was something I saw pop up in the news this week. So we'll kind of follow that a little bit more, but it seems like right now, with that evidence that there was no way the gun could have fired without him pulling the trigger, it makes all the comments and remarks he's made for the last 6 months look stupid, which I'm happy, because any gun uh, Second Amendment supporter knew that from the very start this was a bunch of BS. So kind of happy about that one. Well, not happy, but you know what I mean. So yeah, there's that one. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that. I just kind of saw it pop up quickly.
Yeah, no, that was about what I've heard about it as well.
Yeah. It's I'm sure it would be nice for the families involved in the aftermath of that to hopefully get some closure, because I can't imagine, as the family of the forget the name of the lady that died, but for her family to get closure would be great. Because I can't imagine what they're going through.
So there is no way that the gun could have gone off without him pulling the trigger. Like, we know
No,
that.
yeah,
I'm just curious, like, um, not even in this situation, just in general, can a gun go
yeah.
off at any point in time without pulling
So
it?
so this particular gun, I can't remember the model number, but it's a revolver. So I think in this case you'd have to pull the trigger for Tom. Maybe you know a little bit more about this, but it releases the lever, which then triggers the firing pin to hit the primer of the bullet, and then causing the ignition of the gunpowder and the release of the bullet. So there's no way for that hammer to move forward and hit the pin hard enough to get the primer ignited in this case. So it would only happen if that essentially the lever or the trigger, which acted as the lever to throw the lever forward to hit the firing pin and primer. Tom, is that right? Does that sound right? I'm not very familiar with revolvers, but that's kind of the impression I was given.
It sounds right. Yeah, I need to review revolvers as well, but yeah.
But yeah, in that case, I mean it's I mean it would be, yeah, it's next to impossible for a gun like that to go off randomly. And I mean, even if it did go off randomly, he still had it pointed at somebody, which isn't isn't in any way, shape, or form smart. And that goes against one of the major gun safety rules. You never point a firearm at something you don't intend to kill, whether it's loaded or not. So, unfortunately, I think that's one. I think the issue it brings up is that a lot of these people that are anti 2A, anti gun know absolutely nothing about guns and firearm safety. So they like to preach on this stuff, but then they don't actually know anything. And I think this was seen in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, where the prosecutor held up a AR-15 and was pointing it around the courtroom. I mean, he just looked like an idiot, and he was pointing it at people, and the gun wasn't loaded, obviously, but still, you make yourself look like a complete jackass doing something like that, because you're just showing everybody that you know nothing about guns and you have no respect for the instrument that a firearm is. And so I think it's for these people to tell you what you can and can't do with a firearm is just stupid. It's just really stupid. Gets me fired up. I don't like it. Don't like it at all. But yeah, it be interesting to see what happens. Okay, the last kind of domestic news I had, guys, was that whole PayPal thing that I sent it to you guys this week. I thought that was crazy. PayPal, for those of you who don't know, has a new and there's been a lot of like back and forth in the news about this. So they said they're not going to do this now, but this was the policy that they put out. It's called the New Acceptable Use Policy, and it would begin on November 3rd, 2022. And it would essentially allow them, PayPal, to withdraw $2,500 from accounts. So this is your personal account, $2,500 from accounts if they can find anything you said which is objectionable. And it could literally be that you say something about, I mean, to the extent of maybe even like you're pro 2A or you're pro Trump, or it doesn't limit anything. I mean, anything they find objectionable that isn't woke, they can essentially go into your account and remove $2,500. And then PayPal came out and said, wait, now we won't be fining people $200 or $2,500. I'm like, really? But you still got this policy in place. So I don't know what's going on, guys. I don't know if you guys saw anything else, but I was like, I saw this and I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, another crazy, big company like this. And this seems insane because you're literally stealing people's money. I mean, I don't even understand how that's legal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just crazy how far we've come with the censorship. I mean, you think back 5 years ago to where I guess that's about where I would kind of pinpoint when a lot of these efforts started. It was when Trump was running for the first time. And I remember people back then were starting to say, I noticed it on Twitter, people would be saying that they were being shadow banned or losing followers, not having their tweets show up in people's feeds. But just the speed with which that has accelerated to where now you're literally taking people's money who don't go along with the mainstream narrative. I mean, 5 years. That's all it takes. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, and and this in my mind, like I'm just thinking like, what's the next big step that happens? And if it's not these private companies doing this banning and taking your money, what happens with these new 80,000 IRS employees? Are they going to be showing up at your doorstep to take $2,500, $5,000, $10,000 from you for saying something bad about the government? I mean, seriously. I mean, where does this stop? And that's where I get the most nervous is it's like, okay, if we allow this to happen, what is the next step? Because it's already gone pretty damn far as far as I'm concerned, and we need to take it about 15 steps back at least before we're even talking about some sane rational thinking at all. And so where does it go from here? That's my biggest question is if we don't stop this, what's the next big thing that they're going to say, you know?
Keep in mind too that those IRS agents you mentioned are now well trained in firearm tactics. Um,
Mhm.
I think I remember they were providing. I forgot what the term was. It was like weaponry usage or something. But yeah, it's like how how did IRS agents all of a sudden become, I guess, enforcers is what they're trying to create out of them.
Yeah, they've essentially weaponized the IRS in the most literal way possible. They've they've armed them and they've trained them to be essentially, I mean, like any other three-letter government agency. So now they can come take your money with the guns that they stole that the ATF stole from you.
We
Yeah, so that's it's a crazy one. I don't know what to think about it. I'm gonna have to keep track of that one because where does it go? I don't know if this will actually be able to. I can't understand how this could be legal. I really don't. And so I know if this is a real policy, I won't be using PayPal anymore. And that's stupid. And I hope
well,
hopefully a lot of people will kind of step up and say no to that if that's the case.
I know yesterday their stock dropped 3% and it dropped another 6% today. I had some, I'm not sure if this is the correct number, but it was about 9 billion in value of the stock lost. So hopefully that'll wake them up, but
Yeah, that's a
you
good
never know.
start. Hey, that's a good start.
You also wonder too, like how Netflix and other companies like that are still around because their stocks have depleted so far. I think they're down 74% this year, or something like that.
That's crazy. Makes you wonder if there's some funneling going on there from good old Uncle Sam.
You never know.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, we're going to move into some more exciting news. I think some world news we got here. Just we'll briefly touch on this because I do want to get to our main topic for today. But there was a Russian airstrike that hit Kyiv in Ukraine 2 days after the Kerch Bridge was bombed in Crimea. Russia blamed the Ukrainian government for the attack, and Russian officials, Putin actually, said they will respond appropriately to Ukrainian attacks on Russia. So that's kind of the big news coming out of Russia right now. Also, that a Russian official has claimed to Sky News Arabia that Ukraine is seeking to obtain a nuclear weapon. This is a claim that Ukraine's previously denied. So it's really tough, guys. And I know we talked about this a little bit before the podcast, but it's really tough to know what information you're getting on this is true or not. Obviously, you get the big headlines like this Russian airstrike and the bombing of the bridge in Crimea, but it's just so hard to kind of sift through all the different news sources and the different agendas they're trying to push, whether it's European news source or a liberal U.S. news source or a primarily Republican or conservative American news source. It's just so tough to sift through all the BS to get to actually what's going on. But at least from my perspective, I think the thing that makes me struggle with this is that I and I hate to say it, is as bad as everything that Russia's done. I don't agree with the invasion of Ukraine. But when it comes to the statement that was I believe from Putin that said they that Russia will respond appropriately to Ukrainian attacks on Russia. I can't say that if this was the U.S. responding to an attack on the U.S., I can't say that I would expect any less different of a response. I feel like I get where they're coming from. I think this is maybe the important thing to really look at when we're trying to look objectively at big issues like this where there's a lot of different conflicting news sources. Is you have to look at both sides and you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, how would I react to this situation? And for me at least, I kind of do get where Russia's go. If this was an actual attack on Russia, it's I can't say that I don't 100% disagree with that response. Is at least the statement made that they respond appropriately to Ukrainian attacks on Russia. And I don't think that Ukraine attacking Russia is necessarily the best response to this, or if it's true that they're trying to obtain a nuclear weapon. I don't think a nuclear standoff or a nuclear war with Russia is the right way to resolve this situation. And I don't think it would end well for anybody. So I think there's a certain point when somebody needs to look at this objectively, because if not, who knows, maybe we'll end up in nuclear oblivion. I don't know. I don't know what you guys' thoughts are on this. That was just kind of my take.
Yeah, it's definitely, with the amount of misinformation going on, very difficult to, I guess, gauge the situation and make a moral decision on which side to support or which one to I think how to phrase this. I mean, I always say when the Western media is demonizing a country, in this case Russia, there's at least something right that they're doing, given how radically left our media establishment is. And I mean, Putin has said some pretty pretty striking statements regarding the US and our the direction that we're heading in. I know a couple weeks ago he made a comment saying that like the West is pushing the work of Satan by implementing their gender ideologies, which I was like, I can't really disagree with that as much as I would, as much as I don't like to say that I agree with them. You know, I think there's a little bit more to the story than meets the eye. For one thing, I know that the Donbass region, um, since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, I think there have been, I want to say at the very least, 7,000 deaths due to the partisan infighting in the Donbass region between the Ukrainian nationalists and the Russian partisans. So that's clearly a problem that Putin claimed to be solving by invading. I don't agree with that, but it wasn't simply an annexation based upon Russia just being greedy for more territory, as the some of the media talking heads would have you believe. Um, on the other hand, there are things, bombings that Russia's carried out that were completely unethical, as this bridge bombing carried out by Ukraine was. So, overall, just a very, very complex situation, and one that, again, our media would have everybody in their perfect world be totally siding with Ukraine, but that's really just, I mean, you can't, as I said, you can't take a moral stance in this situation, I don't think, one way or the other.
Yeah, I
I don't know
think
if any of that made sense or not,
no,
but
it makes a lot of sense. I think the important thing is to not even take a side necessarily. And I know that's exactly what the media pushes. It's always to take a side. And that's what our politicians want, but really to look at this in the most humane way possible. I think is probably the best way to phrase it. And look at both sides and see there's people on both sides suffering. There's people in Russia that are getting drafted into this war that they don't want to fight. They don't want to be out there fighting, right? And there's people probably on the Ukrainian side. I mean, they were forced into this whole thing and they probably don't want to be out there fighting and they don't want to see their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their kids die in bombings. And so I think there's so much to unpack there, but I think the best way to look at this is just look at it from the most humane way you can, and ask yourself, is picking a side really going to solve anything? And wouldn't we be better off? And wouldn't this whole situation be better off if people could come to an agreement on something instead of being so divided? And there's this tendency for humans to be very partisan or very tribal in the way we look at things. There's a right, there's a wrong way, there's the good guys, there's the bad guys, very black and white. But really, at the end of the day, we're all, I mean, we're not that much different. We're all these borders that we make up are an imaginary line, and at the end of the day, we're all humans. We're all brothers and sisters. So it's, I think, always important to look at both sides because we need to do our very best to work together because I mean we've got this great big world and we've got lots of people around us. Why stay angry at each other when you can make the best out of it? You know what I mean? And we get really like we get in our own little bubble, our own little country, might be our own state, it might be our own even town, and we just kind of like annex ourselves from the rest of the world. And I think it's just important to have a little bit bigger view on things and a bigger picture. Does it really help to kind of segregate yourself from the rest of society in the long run? I don't know if it does, but I think the better world would be better off if we could kind of all take that approach to a certain extent.
Yeah, well said. I think it is. It's emotionally satisfying to find a scapegoat and something to place the blame on to explain away all the problems that we're facing. But yeah, I think that's kind of taking the lazy way out in a sense, in
Yeah.
that you're not I don't know. It's like you're kind of avoiding confronting the possibility that your instinct of who to blame could be wrong. um yeah, I think mentioned it before, but that is what you see in the media. They do prey on that human instinct, which is it's natural, but they know that in a situation like this war in Ukraine, people are looking for someone to blame, so it's easier to just pin it all on one side. And yeah, yeah, essentially that's their game plan, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to blame. I think it's easy and convenient to place blame on other people and not look inward to the own our own problems that we have going, or the contributing factors that we might have had in these situations. So it's always easy to be like, oh well, Putin caused this problem, or you know whatever the situation might be, but not really look and self-evaluate and say, could we have had something to do with this problem? What could we have changed to fix this problem? I think one of the biggest things is, if you look at, especially from a NATO perspective, and I could somewhat understand this from Putin's point of view, NATO's been encroaching on Russian territory for a long time, and weaponizing, pushing weapons closer to the borders of Russia. And so from his perspective, I could see that as an infringement on the deals made with Gorbachev. So you have to look at this holistically. You can't just place the blame on one person, one country, one thing. You really have to take everything into account, evaluate all the factors, even the factors you might have played as a country, as a person, whatever it might be, whatever the situation is. I think it's always easy to throw the blame on somebody else than take accountability for anything you've done.
Yeah, it's so true. It seems like it's almost like a game of taunting in some aspects.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, guys, that's all I got for world news. Are you guys ready to move on to the main topic? Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're going to cover three of the amendments today because we kind of felt like they all went together. So we're going to hit the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth because they all fall into the justice system. I think what would play into the justice system and trials and kind of the law. So maybe we'll go through one by one, and we'll just give them a brief overview, and then we'll chat about them as always. I'll go ahead and read the Sixth Amendment, which says, "In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial, by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, to have compulsory process up for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and have the assistance of counsel for his defense." So I mean, this really lays out what I think the importance of this one at least from my perspective, is that it really lays out what the trial process, a public trial, and should look like, and the rights given to whoever the whoever the criminal, or whoever the person being prosecuted is. And I think this is important because, again, like we discussed in the last episode, you're innocent until proven guilty. And so to lay out kind of the framework of what a just and fair trial looks like, I think is pretty important. It starts out with saying the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. So that's the big thing that sticks out to me there, at least, is the impartial jury. And today, especially with social media, I think this is really tough because there's so in the news, the 24-hour news cycle, it's really tough to get an impartial jury because a lot of times when you commit a crime, especially a big, you know, a big crime, there's so much information that goes out there, so it's really tough to get an impartial jury. But the importance of that is that you should have the impartial jury, so you have people that are only looking at the facts presented by the prosecution and the defense to come to the conclusion of whether this person is guilty, if there's enough evidence to prove this person was guilty. Um, and if not, then they're innocent. So I think that's the big one. Also, I think the other thing I get from this first kind of segment is it says the right to a speedy and public trial. And I guess I never really thought about this until I was doing a little bit of reading on it today. But I could see where a speedy trial could be especially important if you're trying to clear your name. Say you're an innocent person, you've kind of been thrown under the bus and you need to clear your name. Well, without a speedy trial, your name could be defamed and you could lose everything in life, right? You're and so I think having that speedy trial or the with a trial without any unnecessary delays is important because it gives the person, the defendant, the ability to clear their name as quickly as possible. Um, do you guys have anything that stands out for you in kind of that first statement? Or should I move on?
Yeah, for me that was pretty cut and dry, I think. Don't have any keen insight or anything on it. I think you laid it out pretty well.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Um, the next part that I think stood out to me. So it goes on to say which district shall have been previously ascertained by the law and informed by the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, and to have a compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor. So there's both witnesses against you and witnesses for you. So you should not only have people testifying against you, but also people testifying in your defense. So having both of those, I think, is important for a fair and just trial. Um, and then the last and final statement is, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. And this affords, I think, this is probably one of the most important things in this, is everybody has a right to counsel. So nobody should be denied the right to counsel. So everybody should have somebody fighting for their defense, no matter who they are, even if they don't have their own private lawyer, to be afforded somebody by the state. So I think that kind of lays it all out. I think, at least from my perspective, this sixth one the Sixth Amendment is important because it lays out kind of what a fair, just trial looks like in a manner that's pretty straightforward. So I think it's good to have in writing because otherwise I feel like it could get really twisted and construed on what is and is not a fair trial. So if you guys are ready, we could move on to the seventh. Tom, do you want to take this one? Want to read it?
Sure.
Awesome.
The Seventh Amendment reads, in suits at common law, where the value of controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by a jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined by any court of the United States, and according to the rules of the common law.
Now I'm gonna be honest. I read this one, guys, and I still don't really understand totally what it means. I don't know about you guys. I still am a little bit confused, but I did do a little bit of research online, and I pulled this from a website that deals with a lot of. I'm sure they deal with a lot of legal definitions and stuff like that. But it says that, and this was some pretty good insight. I'll link this below so people can read. But it says, and this is probably the best insight I'll be able to give us, and maybe we can just discuss it a little bit. But this will be better than anything I can say. It says the Seventh Amendment continues a practice from English common law of distinguishing civil claims, which must be tried before a jury, from claims and issues that may be heard by a judge alone. It only governs federal civil courts and has no application to civil courts set up by the states when those courts are hearing only disputes of state law. Again, I'm not a legal expert here, but from what I can gather, this is just a distinguishing of the civil of a civil claim versus, like it says, a claim that a judge can hear alone. I'm assuming that when it says in suits of common law where the value of controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. So I don't know what $20, and if this is still the case, but I don't know if $20 is still the kind of gold standard. So I guess if you had a controversy that was under $20, if you wouldn't get the right of trial by jury. But essentially, what it's saying is any or most controversies or larger controversies shall be there's the right to trial by jury and not just a judge. And I think maybe the example I can think of this here is if you go to like a traffic claims, like if you get like a ticket and you want to dispute a ticket, you go and you stand before the judge and you dispute the ticket with the judge, versus if it's like a large sum of money, then you'd obviously get the right to a jury to hear. And I think the difference is there is maybe the larger, you have the right, if you need it, to have a jury decide if you should be, let's say you get in a lawsuit, you have the right of the jury to be there to make the decision if in case of a lawsuit. So I could see where that protects the right of the person to a fair trial. And I think that's kind of the point again of the Seventh Amendment, just like the Sixth, is to protect the right of the people to a fair and just trial. And then we'll just move on to the Eighth. And this is probably the one that I knew the most about. The Eighth Amendment is excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. And I know that last sentence for me is the one that stands out the most. no cruel or unusual punishment shall be inflicted. I think this is most commonly mentioned in the context of the death penalty. Um, I mean, it also mentions excessive fines, which I would assume are more in the case of more in civil cases than criminal cases. But I don't know if you guys, I don't know what guys' thoughts are on the cruel and unusual punishment and how that relates to the death penalty. I know that's like a really controversial subject, um, but coming from the founding fathers' perspective, I could see why maybe it was important to them to have something written in our Bill of Rights that kept the government from being able to enforce cruel and unusual punishment on citizens um, without legal measures. I don't know what you guys' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I guess this is kind of taking it in a little bit different direction, but I think it's interesting to note the context that under which this amendment was created, because at the time in the society they were living in any other country, you were still in the judicial system allowed to behead people. You still had people being hanged, drawn and quartered in England. So it's interesting to have um, a system so different and more, I guess, humane thinking and thought, I should say, than the rest of the world.
And what I find kind of funny is like if you look at like American history, I wouldn't say this has necessarily been followed very very well because if you look at like especially the Wild West days of America, I mean people they were out there hanging people left and right, you know? They were enforcing all sorts of crazy punishments. So I don't know. I kind of find this one funny because I could see why at the time they had this because like you said, there was there was really no other country that didn't have cruel or unusual punishments. And so I just kind of chuckle because I'm like, really, we didn't see the removal of this until pretty recently, I would say. And for the most part, even, I mean, I mean, some states, I could be wrong on this, but I think some states still even have the electric chair. I could be completely done out, but I know it was a somewhat recent way of execution for the death penalty. So I know the eighth is always the big argument against the death penalty, but it is interesting to see like even after this was put in place, it kind of continued a little bit anyways.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the conversation and the death penalty, but it would be interesting to find out more. It's interesting too that they have in here no excessive bail or excessive fine, so it's almost like it keeps the person from being thrown into jail to pay something they can't afford, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me. Um, in a way, it seems like it protects them from a future punishment outside of what the court deems. So, like, let's say if you were put into jail for like 5 years or something, but your fine was like $1 million, you're probably paying that off for a lot longer than just the 5 years in prison.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they just put a cap on if you're in jail, you'll be in jail. Once you're out of jail, you're out of jail. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I do find it interesting because, like I said, all three of these amendments really are focused on protecting the citizen from unjust, unfair trial or unjust, unfair punishments in the legal system. So while these not might not be the most really I mean they're pretty straightforward as far as how they're written, but I think they do provide a really good structure for how our legal system functions to this day. And they still protect the American citizen from the unjust, unfair systems that I think the founding fathers kind of saw in or during their time um, across the world. So I think it's pretty interesting to see. And this is not to say that the American legal system's perfect, and there's obviously a lot of cases where people still do get they're treated unfairly and they get put away for life or even given the death penalty for crimes they didn't commit. So it's not to say that it's perfect in any way, but I think comparatively to other systems, I think this one, I think it's important to have these rights because they really do set some checks and balances to make sure that the American citizen really does get the most fair trial possible and preserves their freedoms until they are proven guilty. So it was pretty interesting reading through these. These aren't always the most exciting to go through, but I think it makes you sit and kind of ponder, why do we have this? Why is this important? I don't often sit and contemplate the Sixth and Seventh Amendment. I
Yeah,
don't
they're
know.
more.
I don't know if anybody does.
Well, yeah, I think a few people might, but it's one of those things where um, it would be great to know more of the history behind them, and then read why they formed them in this way. But I was just thinking, there's this movie. I think it's called Sophie Scholl, where it's about this lady and two friends that were trying to speak out against the Nazis in World War II, and they were caught and put on trial for what they did. And it was pretty much they just sat in a room and the judge said, "You're condemned," and that was it. There wasn't a jury, there wasn't any defense, there wasn't anything. And when they tried to defend themselves, they just said that you're trying to overthrow a regime. So they just considered them a treason, got rid of them. So that's kind of what happened in the French Revolution as well. They would just say you're an enemy of the state, get rid of you. So I think with these amendments, what the founding fathers were trying to make sure what happened is that each person had to have the same process of the system and the justice court, and then through that system, they would be deemed probably the best way of whether or not they're innocent or guilty. And then it's not like the court system is just a front for the government to get rid of people they don't like. It has to be from something a person did, and it has to go through a lot of steps. So it slows down corruption, I think.
And I think that's the common thread through a lot of this. A lot of these amendments is it slows down the corruption and it really protects the citizen to the highest extent possible. So we're pretty lucky. I always think about that, especially as I look at like a lot of countries today, like China and Russia, and even going to some of the countries in Europe. I don't know if I'd necessarily want to be on trial in any of those countries. So it makes me, and hopefully I never have to be on trial, guys. But it at least I feel somewhat confident in the system to know that if I ever was in a situation where I had to go to trial, that I'd feel somewhat confident in the system that it's there to protect my rights. And yeah, I think it's I think it's something again that probably could be improved. Like I said, it's not perfect, but we have something to be really grateful for as Americans to have those rights. So
So true.
well, guys, that's all I have. And if you guys don't have anything else, I'm ready to close it out for the day.
Yeah, I think we had a good discussion this week. I mean, we had a lot of good topics. I think, I mean, um, we all seem to share some pretty good information, I think, on the current topics, and then kind of our insights on what we see is going on, and then trying to just take a more objective view of what's happening and not get too feverish or panicky, because then it just seems like everything starts to fall apart when you're too worried about what's happening in the world, and you like can't even go to work anymore because you're too stressed out. But if you can talk to guys, like you two, and just kind of talk things out, think about things a little more, get some different viewpoints, it makes you feel a lot more at peace. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always find it amazing, like as we're talking, how like easy it is to tie back like a lot of these current events into the things we talk about later in the podcast as far as our rights as Americans, and some of the documents that were written, over 200 years ago. It's really amazing still how relevant they are in today's world. And so every podcast I always think, oh wow, that really relates back to this, or that relates back to that. And so it's always I think that's always really cool to see in our discussions. But
Mm-hmm.
today was a good one, guys. Well, I'll close it out. Thank you for listening and making it through this podcast. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to subscribe to both our Spotify and our YouTube. Turn on the post notifications just so you get updates when we post every Friday. Um, if you also are inclined, we have our Instagram, the Green Dragon Podcast. You can go check that out. The link should be in our Spotify description and YouTube, and it's the show notes as well. You can also go check out um, our parent company, Lifeline. There's some pretty awesome stuff on there as well. We've got stories of Americans that have done great things. We've got a whole line of apparel that's pretty awesome, pretty patriotic. So you can go check that out too. All those links are found in the show notes, as well as our Spotify link to our website. So if you guys want to check that out, that'd be great. But be safe this week. Be a good person, be a good neighbor, and most importantly, be a good American. Thank you for joining us. God bless.